Welcome everybody to the second of the Grow Asia Digital Learning Series. My name is Paul Boaty, and I'm the Director of Knowledge and Innovation at Grow Asia. I want to welcome both the people who are here in the room in Singapore, as well as those that are dialing in from across ASEAN. For many of us who are committed to empowering smallholders in ASEAN, it is clear that a range of technologies are poised to transform the sector. A basket of tools are now available to us, including advisory tools, digital lending tools, and of course drones, which together promise to increase farmer productivity, help markets to work more efficiently, and grant farmers easier access to capital. Grow Asia has launched the series because learning is one of the first steps of this transformation. We're attempting to build a community of sectoral leaders who are committed to learning about these technologies and partnering together to realise the potential of digital on the smallholder farms of ASEAN. Today's session is just about one small part of the broader digital landscape in ASEAN. We're talking about drones, and particularly drones for both spraying and imagery applications. Later on, you'll hear from the team at Ipsos, who's been doing some great work studying both the drone landscape in China as well as the potential for drones across ASEAN. In their first report, they argued that drones may be 40 to 60 times more efficient than humans in spraying chemicals. And that's in terms of the amount of resources that are used to deliver those chemicals. In their second report, they go on to mention that the number of drones that are spraying chemicals in China doubled between 2016 and 2017. There are now over 13,000 drones spraying chemicals on farms in China. We look forward today to hearing from a panel of experts talking about both what's happening in China as well as reflecting on what the lessons are for Southeast Asia. I want to thank Rob Hume from Beanstalk for putting together today's session, as well as the Inclusive Business Action Network for co-sponsoring the series together with Grow Asia, and our donors at the Australian Government and Canadian Government for sponsoring the whole work of Grow Asia. At the end of today's session, I'll give you some more details on our next session, which is happening on the 17th of June, and that next session is all about satellite imagery. And we're actually going to have over 20 people come from all across ASEAN, from 11 different projects, to share their experiences in using satellite imagery to inform decisions by smallholder farmers. So thank you very much for coming and taking the time to learn and reflect on what we think is a very important technology for the smallholder sector in ASEAN. And I'll pass it over to Rob.
Thank you, Paul. So, Paul just mentioned my name is Rob Hull. I'm with a young company called Beanstalk. We're based out of Melbourne, but I'm head of the Asia operations here in Singapore. So, one of the things that gets us frothing is disruptive technology. And arguably, from what we've seen in China, there's nothing more disruptive for smallholder farmers than what we've seen with the drone rollout. And you'll hear more from Jessica in just a minute. Before we get rolling, of course I want to welcome the participants who are live streaming from around Asia. But I do also want to get just a show of hands from who's being represented, because we have quite a cross-section in the audience. So perhaps hands up who's from government. We have a sole representative. Thank you very much for coming. From industry, crop protection, seed. Okay. From drone providers, service. Okay. And other. And good cross section. Okay. So just a bit of a run through before we hand over to Jessica, who's going to go through the drone report for China. Our focus, as Paul just mentioned, is on smallholder farmers. And things that we can do as an industry, as an ecosystem, to help deploy technology and innovation to bring real change that we can both scale and mainstream. And typically, those technologies, whilst there are long R&D programs running with great companies around the world, here in Asia. What we're interested in is mainstreaming technologies that are readily available, that smallholder farmers or the service providers can pick up at speed. And so through the course of the digital learning series from Grow Asia, you'll hear about, and hopefully you can rejoin with the other 4 learning series workshops that we're having during the course of this year. You'll hear about technologies that are available, at least, and things that we can do to help facilitate the adoption of those technologies across the Grow Asia focused countries. Our challenge is that, and as you'll hear from today, we've built 4 pillars around, and thanks to Paladrone actually for the photograph, you'll notice the photograph here. There are 4 key pillars, or 4 key pillars of challenges that we've identified that you'll see as a common theme throughout the panel session, and then later on in the workshop series. Now, we think there are probably plenty of other challenges as well, but we thought it's best to focus on 4 key ones and things that we can do to address and unlock some of the potential for drones across Southeast Asia. So what are we doing today? So we're going to, as I mentioned, we welcome Jessica from Ipsos Consulting in Hong Kong. Ipsos have been doing a lot of great reporting on the drone market. You've got a prequel tonight to the latest China disruption drone study. And we'd like to think that as a result of your feedback from the workshop, that we could action a study for Southeast Asia, which we think is important to help kickstart drone adoption for smallholders here. We're going to have a brief panel session with myself and Jessica, together with Xiang He. Where's Xiang He? Who is with CropLife Asia, the head of CropLife Asia here in Singapore, representing peak body representing key crop protection companies, and also Jinchi from Paladrone. So getting some really key insights into drone operation here in Southeast Asia. And then, arguably the most important part of the day is a workshop. Now, on your tags, you'll see a number. And it corresponds to 4 of those vertical streams that we want to focus on. If you feel passionate about being in a different workshop or around a different table, by all means go that way. Now, I know that Xiang He, who's leading up the regulatory table, might feel a little bit lonely because people don't feel as though that's important. But actually, before, we think that that's possibly one of the most important verticals in terms of unlocking potential, both in terms of registration and regulatory for each country. And then importantly, the leads for each of those tables are going to come back and present a 5-minute summary on your feedback. And importantly, in that feedback, what we really want you to do is distill down 3 key actions you want to see happen in each of those verticals. And what we're going to do is take that feedback away and loop back with a summary of the workshop, and you'll be able to follow that through during the course of the year. And then finally, Paul's going to give us some feedback. We're going to allow time during the panel session, and maybe after Jessica's presentation. So if you have questions, please go for it. Put your hand up. I'm not sure if we can get questions through the live feed, possibly, as well. But we really want to make this a session as interactive as possible. We have a relatively small group here. Don't feel shy. There's no stupid questions. There's only good questions that other people were wanting to ask and perhaps didn't feel as though they could. And most importantly, the network. What we've experienced in the past is that the networking session after the main session is arguably where a lot of the work gets done. And a lot of connections are made and a lot of really deep insights as a result of the information that you hear. Cards are shared, contacts are made, and that's the way that we help build an ecosystem. So I think, from a government perspective, we've seen a lot of effort go into building the ecosystem through the Seeds Capital, through the 30 by 30 announcement for R&D funding, the cluster up in Kranji. So there's a lot happening here in Singapore Also the accelerators, I see Claire from the Yield Lab. I think there's lots of things happening here that help build out Singapore and establish as a technology hub, not only to feed its own population, but also to supply technology into the region. So we're really excited, also partnering with Adam and Padang and Co, because it takes a village to raise something as nascent as agri-food technology here in Singapore, and it's something that we're really excited and really passionate about. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jessica, who's going to run through the Run Australia report. Thanks, Jessica.
So first and foremost, I have to thank Eurasia and Robert for inviting myself and Marcus from Ipsos to come give you our presentation today. Marcus and I are the co-leads for our Drone Technology Adoption Center of Excellence at Ipsos. What we do at Ipsos is we really look at fact-based consulting work and pragmatic approaches to market entry and growth strategy. And we have previously published a paper on paths to adoption for drone technology in agriculture. And our second paper is actually going to be released tomorrow, but you get an exclusive copy on the corner that you can pick up today. And it focuses on China's agriculture drone revolution, and it was published in partnership with DJI in China. So what I'll do today is really recap what agriculture drones can do, how it's changing and disrupting the entire agriculture ecosystem, and what are the business opportunities and, of course, barriers to that and hopefully it'll give you a really good introduction and background for our workshop today. So what we do in Ipsos is we looked at across industry sectors, and agriculture was the most interesting one to us. Thank you. What we believe it will become is, it will become the largest commercial drone segment compared to film, compared to mining, compared to construction, because of the sheer scale and the sheer application capabilities that it can deliver. And of course, technology is a really important discussion, and it's in the forefront of a lot of regulation right now, especially in China, because there's a huge food security issue, and there's a huge population growth issue. You will all know that our population will be increasing by 34%. Food has to increase by 17%, and the variety that goes into that has to increase. The TFP in agriculture overall has to increase by 1.75%, and for Southeast Asia, that has to increase by 22% alone. So there is a huge gap and a huge need for technology, for some tool to improve productivity in agriculture. And what I'll do throughout the presentation today is also introduce what our China study looks like. So we'll have snapshots in China insights in our presentation. What we found most interesting about China was that it's the largest drone supplier to the world. It supplies 70% of civilian drones in the market globally, but it has less than 2% adoption, agriculture drone adoption in its domestic market. And it has a huge demand and a huge push for agriculture drone adoption. China alone feeds 21% of the world population, so including itself at 19%. It has 8% of the world's arable land by acreage, but it has a huge environmental issue where a lot of the land is contaminated and a lot of the potable water is contaminated. So with agriculture drones that's funded by the government, it's going to be the next solution that they're looking into for agricultural machinery. Yeah. Great. So just a quick recap, I'm sure you already know. So for agriculture drones, it's a great tool that bridges a lot of aerial technology that's existing, whether it's airplane for crop dusting, whether it's satellite imagery, to a lot of ground applications. It can range from multi to hyperspectral imagery for analysis, and it can also be used for crop spraying as well. Okay, great. So we always think of agriculture drones as a very high-tech tool, that it's very sophisticated, it's for data, it's for digital platforms. And what we discovered in China and a lot of applications is that it's also can be formed in a very basic formation. So to your right, you'll see an image of a drone that's built out of an oil tanker. And this is easily replaceable. You don't have to think about corrosion to your nozzles, to the tanks itself. It's about 30 cents US dollars to replace it, or whenever you have a bottle. And this is a really cheap drone that can spray in China. Whereas you also have granular applications, and this is not widely discussed, for fertilizer granulation or for seeding applications, and this is already being used in China. And what we want to illustrate is that agriculture drone is permeating every step of the agriculture process, perhaps except for harvesting at the moment. So it really plays a huge role in terms of what tools are being manufactured, what kind of crop science products are required, the formulation required for drones, and if you need to develop new products for drone applications, it creates a new market space for service providers, and it also creates a new space for digital platforms and online drone service network providers. And this drives a huge impact to end users, where a lot of, especially smallholder farms, are no longer reacting to what's happening to their crops and their fields. They're able to take this information and manage their crops much more proactively and much more efficiently. Part of our study, what we looked into was the adoption level of agriculture drones and specifically aerial tools in different markets. And this is very important to understand how drones will be introduced into each market. So, to let you know that drones is not a new technology. Agriculture drones is not a new technology. It was first used in Japan in the 1970s, and the first drone was from Yamaha. So they took a motorcycle engine, parked it with a helicopter drone, and they'll have the Yamaha RMAX. And they've been using it mainly for a poverty alleviation problem, and their penetration rate is really high, especially for rice crops. It's at 70%. In the US, you have a very different situation where they introduced drones quite recently, but much more for surveying purposes, much more for big field surveying. It can't replace, crop dustings from airplanes and big harvesters. And it's very important to look at these two markets as the earliest adopters of agriculture drone technology when we look into the upcoming markets of interest. So you'll see that we picked 4 countries in our initial study to just take a look at what that adoption landscape is going to look like and how it's going to be adopted. So in China, as I mentioned, it's the largest supplier of drones with the least level of adoption in agriculture. The opportunity there is very huge. You have South Korea at less than 15%, and they adopted at a similar time as Japan. You have Thailand at 10%, and you have Philippines at less than 15%. And there are a lot of factors, and we'll showcase our index as well, that goes into how it's being adopted. We have a huge piece on the regulatory side, but there are mainly 2 approaches to drones being adopted in terms of aviation law. So you have one that's for huge risk control, which is taken by the FAA, and recently a bit more relaxed, where they're completely worried about if a drone falls out of the sky, if it damages crops, if there's chemical drift that goes elsewhere. And you'll have other countries that are much more relaxed and willing to test this technology out outside of urban dense areas. So this is really interesting in how it drives the adoption and how quickly this will change the technology. Right? So you probably know this already, but this is the total arable land in our country case studies, just to show you a bit of scale. But what's most important here is also to pay attention to the average farm size in each of these markets. This dictates the type of drones that is required and the type of products that will be required for each market. So very clearly you can see that the US has huge fields. Crop spraying from a drone might not be the most efficient way. That's where they leverage highly on precision agriculture, surveying, imaging, data processing. And for the other countries, you'll see that, especially for China, you have a huge market with high fragmentation in these plots. How do you scale and how do you make it economically viable to introduce this technology for sustainability? And for our China study, we've been tracking the market over the past year and a half, and we also have a database of over 200 drone companies that we're actively looking into. There are over 100 drone models that are available for agriculture, and in China, over the past 2 years that we've studied this, they went from a pilot study in 2016 to a nationwide subsidy program. It's available in 15 of the 23 provinces that you see in China. What this details is how much penetration can introduce, but also you'll see that, I'm not sure you can see it very clearly, but with the provinces with the grainy areas, these are actually key agriculture provinces that have adopted drones without any subsidies, so they've already moved forward with this technology. DJI, our partner for this paper, estimates the number of aircraft, and I think Paul mentioned it earlier that the number of aircraft doubled to 13,000 last year. DJI estimates this number to reach 40,000 drones by next year. And it's a huge leap forward. The estimated treated acreage by drones is at about 7 million hectares, so it's quite a significant level. Okay, great. And something we wanted to look into is how is this going to change the farm management model? How is this going to be a viable business for drone service providers, or how is it going to be affordable for small farm holders? And there are three key models that we see. So you'll have the most logical farmer owner-operator. It's actually quite uncommon in China because of the scale, because of the price of the drones, and we don't expect it to be as prevalent. Whereas you have leasing service providers, so same as cooperatives who leverage on machinery leasing or to get financing for crop protection products. This is actually very common in China, and it's going to become more prevalent. And the most interesting thing about our study is the platform operator model. And it is quite uncommon at the moment, but they have developed amazing platforms to lease drones, to have drone service providers, and to have someone take a look at your crop who are agronomic experts. And this was not available before and was a key issue to adopting drones. We expect this to ramp up very quickly in the Chinese market. Just very quickly, and this is also available in our paper, the price of drones. You'll have image surveying drones that are not as expensive, and you'll have crop spraying drones, and depending on the model, will be actually quite expensive if you think about it for a farmer's perspective or farm owner perspective. But the benefits are quite significant. There are a lot of R&D that still needs to go into how effective crop protection is from drones, how much chemicals, how much water it can save. But for certain studies, it can save up to 90% of water used for irrigation, which is pretty high level. And it can save up to 20 to 30% of crop spraying chemicals. And this would be highly disruptive for people who are manufacturing these products. Or it could be a new opportunity where drones can access new space that was previously not serviced before. For image surveying drones, it's obviously going to be much economical compared to satellite imaging without delay, but it is also quite cost effective to use drones for imaging for space that's under a certain barrier as well. And this would be the most interesting piece, perhaps, in our China conversation or for a workshop later, is the price of crop spraying services. we had an earlier discussion where some crop spraying services are quite expensive in other markets. And for China, it's quite cheap, and this is an average. So you'll have people with much more data applications, with much more precision and sophisticated analysis, and that price can go higher. But for the different crop types, this is an average range. And through a service provider, you can see how it becomes much more affordable and much more tangible to adopt this technology. With our studies with DJI, it's terrible. With our studies with DJI, the pilot service, spraying service, can earn more than US dollars $1,500 per month during peak season. So this is significant extra income if they do choose to purchase a drone, and it's a really good business model for people to go back into agriculture, especially in China where there's a huge aging population issue and a huge labor constraint issue. Is it coming up? That's fine. So we previously wanted to showcase digital platforms that are available overseas as well as in China. So correct me if I pronounce this wrong, but we previously were at Agritechnica a year and a half ago, and Bayer launched, is it Xvario? So they had a launch or a relaunch of this digital farming tool, which is incredibly sophisticated, and so did BASF at the time. And it really focused on a lot of European staple crops in terms of what their solution suite could provide in terms of recommending what products and what the information was showing from information collected from drones and satellite. What I believe it's bought by BASF at the moment. Yes, correct. So there has been a transfer of this digital farming product, and we were looking at a solution for Asia as well. And in China, what they have is they have this application called FarmFriend, and this application is highly comprehensive in terms of recommending products, in terms of drone leasing, drone servicing, as well as harvesting services. The green background, what that was showing was the number of drones that is under this platform. So they're not owned independently, but you can join this platform and be a drone service provider, and they have 10,000 aircrafts. They claim they have serviced 1 million more of agricultural land, which is quite high, and they have over 3,000 service providers on this platform. So if you own a drone and you join this app, you can have this extra income, or you can, on the long season, lease your drone out to another user. And how they funded themselves was through Series A funding, Series B funding, and they got a few million US dollars to get this ramped up. And it's one of the most successful cases of integrating digital platform information as well as agriculture machinery to really deliver a viable and economic solution for farm owners. What we did at Ipsos is to really understand what are the different factors that influence the path to adoption for agriculture drones in the market. So we had a question earlier that was really judging. Do we define market in terms of political entity or crop product? And these are all something we want to discuss further. In our attractiveness index, what we looked at was regulatory environment, crop value opportunity, the productivity challenge, existing aerial agriculture tool adoption, as well as the potential for precision agriculture. How ready is that market for precision agriculture use? And we mapped this out just to show you how drones can be adopted differently in each market. In the US, you'll see that precision agriculture is really high, and existing aerial tools are already there. And we take into account a lot of factors such as the farmer's average age, what is the crop value, pricing, how much goes into export as well. And we overlaid this with the other countries just to see what that difference is. And you'll notice that Japan has a hugely different attractiveness into getting into this market. So similar to the US, they have this high potential. They've introduced this technology quite early on. But the biggest driver for them was the productivity challenge. They had a very huge aging population and a lot of people leaving the agriculture sector. So they used this to drive into the market. You can click for 2 more times. Yep, perfect. And 1 more time. Great. So if we look at the markets we looked at, if we were to overlay these countries with their existing agriculture, how open is the regulatory environment? Are there other priorities? And how should this be adopted? So in short, there are a lot of analysis that we can derive from this index, but you'll see that most of these countries have a productivity challenge, whether it's cost, whether it's labor, whether it's time. That is going to be the initial priority for agriculture drones to address before they can move on to precision agriculture and digital platforms. So it really dictates the type of products that need scope to these markets, but also where the focus should be if you were a regulator, to understand what kind of drones and what they're used for in each of the market. And the opportunities is quite big, as you'll see. The existing aerial agricultural adoption is quite low, so there is a huge market space. And what this opportunity means is that it's also a very nascent market. There's a lot of opportunity for us to shape what this is going to look like today. Okay, I'll just run through this really quickly, being mindful of time. But the usage of agriculture drones in China is predominantly for cross-breeding. Only about 5% is used for imaging and surveying, because of that very underlying reason. Farmers in China use drones for crop protection, mainly because of huge fragmented plots, but they also have a lot of co-op structures. Drone platforms in China increase affordability, the accessibility, and most importantly, the acceptance of this technology. And what we want to also do is, in our China paper, look at what the key crop types are. So are these the key products, or are these the key priorities for this market? I'll quickly show you what China has done for cotton in terms of harvesting, and also how effective it has become for other products in the market. Okay, so for cotton, China is the world's second largest cotton producer, and this is just a quick snapshot of how this has impacted smallholder farms in China. They predominantly use DJI drones to do a benchmark. They have a local team that comes in and helps them spray defoliant in cotton pre-harvesting. And from the farmer themselves, they've acknowledged that it saves them it helps conserve about 20% of their cotton output, because they're no longer driving huge tractors across the farm to spray defoliants. It's not trampling their crops, and it saved them a lot of time and cost. So for someone to do this themselves, manually or with a tractor, it takes a few days to complete, and with a drone team, they were able to complete this in 1 day. And what we wanted to really showcase was the opportunity in understanding the different landscape and the crop type in each market. For our adoption insight, we benchmarked this across the crop that was quite common in different markets, which is rice plantations. At the top left corner, you'll see that this is the size of land that's being used for rice plantations in Japan, and that's the level of adoption that they have. These are all our other markets that have, this is all the space in these other markets for rice plantations. And we looked at this opportunity as, if they were to all even get closer to Japan's level of adoption and multiply that space, it's going to be a very big market in terms of what you can do with agriculture drones, how that will impact smallholders, and how much money hopefully we can make in the market. Okay? All right. So just to wrap up very quickly, we'd like to also talk about the drivers and barriers to current adoption. So a lot of the drivers for adoption, as you'll see in our index as well, is that it alleviates labor and resource constraints. It can help improve yields by being more knowledgeable about how your field is performing, or getting more real-time information about your plot and your plots and your crops. It will hopefully improve environmental sustainability by through a lot of pilot training and agronomic training on how to use this material, by reducing the level of chemical dumping that's being practiced in a lot of markets. It will integrate a lot of agronomic information that is not previously available and close that gap. And most importantly, and hopefully, it will reduce a lot of health hazards for people who are practicing manual spraying by using agriculture drones from a distance. And this will be much more detailed if you're joining the expo tomorrow, where we're also giving a short presentation. There are a lot of constraints to mass adoption, but the key message here is that these constraints doesn't mean that it can't be overcome, and the index doesn't showcase that because there's a regulatory barrier, it cannot have other priorities to introduce this technology into the market. So something that is undergoing a lot of study is drift control from drones. How will this impact the effectiveness of the crop products used to protect crops? The flight time and payload is also a significant issue. A lot of battery-powered drones right now only last for 15 to 20 minutes on a heavy charge on one flight. Although it can cover a lot of space, you might not want it to fly that fast. And payload would be a really key issue. How much can a drone carry, and what are the safety issues around that? Specifically for agriculture, night flight operations would be really important for certain crop chemical products where it doesn't make sense to spray during the day. It's not the most effective time. Are there going to be the correct regulations around this for commercial drone usage in agriculture? Affordability would be a key issue. So China has this program for a lot of subsidies, but is this feasible for other markets? Can capital come from somewhere else? Aviation regulation, this is quite common across all commercial drones, where you have piloting license restrictions beyond visual line of sight. You have safety and accident insurance, information ownership issues, as well as autonomous flying issues. And I think the most important thing is the training of agriculture pilots. So we don't want anyone who just flies a drone for fun, take pictures when they're hiking, to think that they know how to apply crop protection products onto a field or for different crops. It is two completely different fields, and it's perhaps the most specific knowledge you need for this segment in agriculture drones. And most importantly, you want to find the most suitable crop protection product to be delivered by drones. It's no longer manual spraying, it's no longer ground application. How will the products stick? How will we conserve it? How will we make sure it's environmentally sustainable? Right. So last but not least, we believe that drones is a technologically assisted tool that can help you with labor alleviation, but as well as decision support systems. It's very important to not only think about drones not capturing information now, but that will become a precursor for precision agriculture in the future for these markets. It will have significant implications across different stakeholders in the agriculture ecosystem. So as mentioned, for drone manufacturers, it's how they develop the products. Should they make imaging drones like SenseFly or EB? Should they make crop spraying drones? What is applicable for these markets? Should they have agronomic platforms? Should they be integrated with agronomic expert platforms to make this the most effective tool? Will they have industry-specific pilot training? So rather than just an aviation regulation saying, I've done these hours, I can fly a drone, how do I know I'm really treating the crop properly or surveying the crop properly? Most importantly is the night operation for drones, and this will also significantly impact their distribution channel strategy. So if a collective are the decision makers for farmers, are they the ones paying for it? Are they the ones making the decision of how this impacts all the other smallholders? For a crop science company, it's really how to manage the changing product landscape and developing new formulations if it's required. Is the product going to be effective? How are you going to collect that information and also test that it's really being applied properly in each of the areas and each of the crops? And more interestingly, it's the digital platforms to recommend products can this be something in the future that can be integrated with a drone solution, where I fly a drone and on my platform, like Expario or FarmFriend, it tells me what products I need so that I know how to treat my land. And last but not least is on the regulation side. What this will impact most is not only aviation but agriculture regulations. So understanding the scale and the type of drone usage for your market would be the most important and most critical part in developing regulations to enable technology for the sector. Managing risk and supporting domestic agriculture and drone industry. What kind of drones do you want to let in? What are your crop priorities? Or what are your agriculture sector priorities? And most importantly, what are the airworthiness requirements around this technology? What are the operation guidelines? And what are the user safety requirements to operate agriculture? Right? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Jessica. Just a plug for her, the drone study by Ipsos, I think. There's some copies printed somewhere here at the front. So feel free to take a copy, and I think also that's available online. Correct? Available, is it tomorrow? For that. So what we might do now is we'll grab the chairs and ask our panelists, including Jessica, to sit in the hot seat. So if we can just grab these chairs. Yeah, no, I'm going to sit this out and see you. Okay, so again, just to introduce, we have Tinsy from Pabladrone. I'll get you to introduce yourself a little bit. Jessica, who you've just heard from, and Xiang He from CropLife Asia. So Tinsy, first of all, can you introduce yourself, a little bit about your business, and something that the audience doesn't know about you.
Yep. Hi everyone. Thanks Rob for the introduction and definitely for the invitation here today. So as Rob mentioned, I started Pabladrone a couple of years ago, and we are a drone service/distribution solutions company. Which when we started in 2016, I'll just go back a bit about how we started and how we progressed to where we are today. When we started in 2016, we were a bunch of guys that were just enthusiasts about drones. We like flying, photography, hobby, and we realized that within Southeast Asia, there was a lot of people utilizing drones for racing, like I mentioned, hobby, but not for industrial solutions. So when we compared that against a Western nation like Australia, Europe, and so on, there was a very clear gap in the market, and that's how we started Pabladrone as a company. In terms of the market segment, why we targeted agriculture, they were the first one to pay us, so that's why we went to it. Within agriculture right now, we split our company into two main segments. One is on the precision agriculture, so for crop scouting, inventory management, and so on. And the second segment is more on the crop dusting or crop spraying, so like what Jessica mentioned a bit earlier. For crop. Right now, we are holding distribution for DJI themselves on their enterprise solutions across Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. And we used to hold their distribution for the agriculture team as well. And I'll just share a bit why I said we used to. In that about in 2016, 2017, when we started the business, we were working with the agriculture team in DJI, and we bought a few units of their Agras MG1S, the white color drone that you might see across board from DJI's website. So when we brought them in, there was a huge bottleneck in terms of DJI's capability to support us locally for after-sales repair and warranty purposes. They had to get us to send the drone back to China for repairs, which was definitely not feasible. So what we did then was, after the initial first unit and our disappointment working with them, we decided to assemble our own drones based on parts from China, which carried a much lower cost, and of course it will allow us to service our customers much faster. So that's what we're doing right now across a few countries.
Okay, Jessica, I know we've just heard from you, but perhaps a good opportunity to give Ipsos a plug and let us know where you've come from.
Sure. So Marcus and I traveled here from Hong Kong. We're in the consulting division of Ipsos. Ipsos is the third largest market research company. We're in 89 countries, and we're from the consulting arm. And why we looked into drones initially was actually for manufacturing, because we're just across the border from DJI and a lot of drone companies. So we built a database on actually components to start with in drone companies. And then we realized that actually the application side was much more interesting, and we got into agriculture drones. So we see it lifting off and picking up very quickly in China, and we really think that this is going to be the next technological tool in Southeast Asia.
Okay, great. Xiang
Thank you.
This is he was previously a farmer too, mate. So you can actually comment from the farmer perspective.
Thank you. I'm Sandy from CropLife Asia. I represent the plant science industry. Our members are people like DSF, Bayer, Syngenta, Corteva, FMC, and Sumitomo. Every year we invest $6.5 billion into R&D. Half of it goes into crop protection, and another $3 billion goes to biotechnology. And our role is to assist to defend license to operate, to ensure that we continue to have license to operate, to make sure the regulatory and environment is conducive for us to deploy technology at a timely manner into the hands of farmers. Just an example, for a product that is released in the US or in Australia, it gets 18 months to be approved. Across Asia, across ASEAN, it's 7.3 years to get a product out into the market. So already, by the time you get a product into the market, it's end of patent time. And the farmers are not getting the technology that they need to cope with climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. So we involve member companies here have been investing heavily into digital farming. And for us, why we're here today is we need to shape the landscape to ensure that drone technology continue to be accessible to the farmers. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, can you hear me?
That's all. Back.
Hello?
Hi. Oh, that's all. Okay.
Right. What about now?
No.
I'll just yell. So maybe So maybe a throw to Jessica first, because I know you've just done a lot of work in China. One of the questions at the top of my mind is a lot of the adoption that we see in China, the reports that the government is subsidising are heavily. And so for an industry that's born out of China, we know that 70% of drones globally come from China. Is the success or the proliferation of drones in China a result of the subsidies that China, the Chinese central government and the provincial governments are providing, or is it a function of adoption of technology for smallholder farmers?
I think that's a really good question. I think it's twofold. I think the food security and the population growth demand, the upcoming two-child policy and a lot of protectionism policy, that is driving all multi-pronged approach to improving agriculture, sustainability, and productivity. Especially when you have trade war and you want to make sure you're protecting the products that are coming out of China, that's definitely one of the biggest drivers. And there is definitely that element where China is trying to rebrand itself, made in China in 2020, and to improve and elevate the type of technology that they can showcase to the world. With DJI, XAG, and all these drone companies coming out of China, they have to showcase that it works by showing that they're using it and adopting it. So what we've seen when we started this was there was not much subsidies available, and it was really driven out of provincial drove this or cooperatives, and there was just this huge gap of labor shortage in agriculture that introduced this technology. So it didn't rely on it, but that acceleration is definitely from the
Right, okay. So maybe as a segue to that, Jinxie, I mean, as an operator, service provider, do you see, how would you characterise service providers, the drone operation in Southeast Asia? Are they attached to a cooperative? Are they an independent service provider? Are they attached to a retailer? What do you think, in your view, what can we take from China and bridge into Southeast Asia?
So thanks for the question. I think just to add on a bit about Jessica, what Jessica said earlier, one of the, I would say the main reason why drones are so successful in China and the adoption is so high is DJI, we have to thank them for bringing the cost of drones down to a point where it makes sense for commercial purpose. Earlier, before DJI came about 10 years ago, drones, they were everywhere already. People were using it for commercial reasons, but a simple unit would cost you 20 grand, 20,000 USD. Whereas DJI, they could do the same for 1 to 2,000. So it became something that makes sense for businesses, and that really pushed the adoption up. Now, to the next question on the service models. Right now in Malaysia, across Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, it's very similar in that drones are typically sold from the manufacturer to corporations or service providers. Manufacturers do not do the services themselves. Majority would be to the corporation, where, for example, in Malaysia, we're most familiar with, there are what we call corporasi across different regions, different states, which forms, they are more of like a corporation of maybe 200, 300 smallholders, and they would buy a few units of drones, and then they have a dedicated team that would service their members. So right now, that is the most common kind of method.
Okay, so what you're saying is those service models do exist currently, but perhaps not at the same scale, is what you're saying. So Xiang He, you mentioned about registration and the importance of having products. And if it takes 7 years to get a registration, if you're doing a drone-specific formulation, how is that possible? And are companies like Bayer and your member companies going to be incentivized to develop drone-specific formulations?
Well, thank you very much for the question. It's really the core, and because right now what you're seeing in the market today are essentially a lot of off-label. I think the good examples are really Japan, because their UAV model, their Yamaha is in the market with 70% penetration. So formulation and use label is really there, but throughout the whole region, I can safely say there are none, and they are not designed for the current usage. So that's why a lot of where it goes back to the regulatory framework is we need to work very closely with the government to sensitize them to allow a UAV or a drone-based regulation. Today, the disparity is drone is controlled by the aviation. It has nothing to, there's no consultation with the agriculture space, number one. Number two is, for example, you just don't, she put up 150 meter, 1 kilometer away on line of sight. The drone is designed to fly 3 kilometers on your laptop, on your iPad, etc. But under the current regulation, it tells you you are not allowed to fly out of sight. One, I don't need a height, I don't need a 150 meter drop. I need that length. One. Two, I cannot fly at night. So because their initial thought was drones are used for photography. You don't fly photography, etc. So there's a clear dislocation in terms of regulatory environment.
So do you think that is the most significant? I know you're running the workshop table on regulatory. So, but, do you think that that's the most significant barrier to adoption for drones? And why we can't repeat the China success?
They're paranoid over the usage of drone. Again, for military, for suicide attempt, if you are in Spain today, if you don't have a license to fly even a recreational drone, is 300,000 euro and end up in jail. If you take a drone transit into Turkey, so a lot of problems, but it's paranoid and not talking to the other sectors that really need application use. Sorry.
Yeah. So just grab the microphone. Who would you characterise? Maybe this is a question. Just very briefly, who would you characterise as the most likely farmer? What does a farmer look like? Someone who's going to either via an app or a service provider to use drones, who doesn't currently use them today. Why would they do that?
I think one is just like initial days, again going back to rice. Combined harvester was nowhere in sight, but today 100% everybody's doing combined harvesting because the Ubering of services is coming through. So with that corporatization, of course, a corporacy, or the shared service it's coming through. Even from planting of rice today, you no longer do your own seeding. You order your seeding, you get it out into a mat, the guy comes with a seeder, and he do all your job for you. So it's again, you have to spray again. It's also part of that service.
Okay. Well, I think from our perspective, where we see people adopting drones, so something we talked about earlier was when there really is that resource gap, when there's that basic farm management gap, that was where we see the flood of drones. But particularly for a lot of users who want to use drones who are younger, they're maybe millennial, a bit impatient, and they want to know how to manage the farm much more proactively, much better. So you'll see a lot of that introduction in terms of using apps, using recommendations, and much more shared services, because they want to see, I'm not just managing my farm, I'm not just a farmer, I'm a tech farmer. So I'm not just managing crops, but I'm actually using data. It's really cool for me to do this. So we'll have that space as well.
I think from my perspective, it would be across the board, regardless of age. Because the problem is very clear, plantations do not have enough labor. That's a very clear problem, where it doesn't matter if you're young or old, it's the same problem, where I would say the biggest roadblock against adoption of drones in the nation right now would be the awareness of it, where most of the farmers, I would say, they know that drones exist and drones can help them, but they don't know how. And even simple things like, what kind of chemical should I use on the drones? What's the water concentration? How much water should I mix with a same amount of chemicals in a unit of drone? And how do I spray it? It's not documented anywhere. So when a farmer comes to a manufacturer, the manufacturer do not have this kind of information, and it sort of acts as a very big roadblock. It confuses them, and it really slows the adoption down. If we could work with regulators, corporations, research institutions to get these kind of standards out, I would say standards, for spraying standards where you use 100 ml of, say, chemical with 38 liters of water, and we publish that image across the industry, then it will really help the adoption.
So, Jessica, I think you went through the shopping list a little bit, but they're all compelling reasons for adoption, notwithstanding that there are some barriers to entry. So we talked about environment, in particular, much more targeted application, access in terms of topography, health of farmers, the speed of operation, access to labour efficiency, and ultimately yield. So I think they're all compelling reasons. What I take away from that is that actually that can bridge, but it's also about awareness, which of course is one of the reasons why we're here today. And I think the other thing I took away was that in terms of platforms and access, which I think fits nicely into the Grow Asia Digital Learning Series, and having platforms, whether through an app or another service access provision, that farmers can actually access the service, and perhaps that's plugged into the existing service providers. We see Tanya from Myanmar for tractors, so maybe that's in the future drones in the same way as Farmer Friend.
Yeah, so I think just following on those few points, I think the biggest challenge is actually the stigma around using agriculture drones and the crop protection used around it. So on the crop protection side, there seems to be this stigma that more is better. If my yields are not performing, I'll use more. Or use other products. Whereas to convince a farmer that's quite in their own way that you use very little and a very thin coat is going to be sufficient is quite hard actually, especially for smallholder farms. And then when it comes to the government, there's definitely the risk side, especially when you talk about a drone that can carry liquid spraying around. It's a huge security threat actually.
When you're perhaps a farmer sprays through your service, engages you, is it a little bit like, I'll get you to spray a little bit first, and maybe a little bit more next year? I mean, typically farmers are a little bit risk averse like that, right?
That's what we're doing. We have to do a small plot of proof of concept for them first. And normally when you're dealing with smallholders, a small plot means the whole thing. Because it's about 1 hectare, it takes you 15 minutes. You have to do the whole thing for them for free, and then if there's no issues, they'll get you to come back again. And also the big problem, I would say, what Jessica mentioned is, traditionally, at least in Indonesia, using manual spraying, they are spraying about 120 liters of water mixed with chemicals per hectare. with drones, if we were to use 120 liters per hectare, it's not possible. So what we're doing is we're trying to really convince them to reduce their water usage, at least to 30 liters right now per hectare. I think in China they're doing about 50 liters per hectare, but we're taking one step at a time with them, and hopefully, I mean, we're still in the works.
That also comes down to seeing setup, right? So calibration at that low water volume is really critical, but then the surfactant ratio is much better, right? So if you get it right in operation, it can be a really good result.
So the other biggest problem that we have today is who is training the drone service provider? So that's where we want to come in. We want to make sure that the regulatory is there for stewardship, that the drone applicators are properly trained. Where she spoke about drift, what are the safety guidelines? That's where we want to go in and partner with the government to make sure that these are all ready, because the MOA are panicking. I'm seeing so many drones flying. What is my position?
Okay. Fantastic. Listen, we're at 6 o'clock. We did say that we were going to be on Swiss time.